Here we go. A new series on Apple TV Plus called Constellation. We're going to unpack this first episode. This is Sean's take. I am Sean Redman. This is your spoiler warning because this is going to be chock full of spoilers. But boy, oh boy, did we stumble on a good show here. So Constellation has dropped its first 3 episodes on Apple TV Plus, and some folks on YouTube are doing one video for all 3 episodes. And boy, there's just so much to unpack in this one. I'm going to do 1 and 1 and 1 because 1 and 1 and 1 is 3, as the Beatles have said. But there's so much to unpack, especially in this first one, because we're really sort of learning what's going on here. And the cold open in this. So the cold open is the bit before the credits. So we have a scene, then we have the credits, and then we get on with the show. The cold open starts with a light. We can't tell what it is, and then it resolves itself into being the headlights of a car driving through a snowstorm. And we see who turns out to be Joe turning the temperature in the car down, and the Alice in the back seat is asking if it can be warmer, and Joe says it's broken. And she's listening to a cassette tape, and Alice asks what the woman's saying in Russian, and Joe says she's saying that the world is wrong way up, or the wrong way round. And that's interesting. So that's the first reference we have to the world being wrong. A car appears in the rearview mirror. They're the only 2 cars on this desolate road in a snowstorm. And the car comes up behind them, and the police lights go on the roof. It's a tense moment. Police car pulls out, drives around, and heads off into the distance. We don't know yet why. We get a shot from above of the road, and it reveals that we are in a place called, I'm going to give it a shot here, Vindeleven, Norway. Sorry, Sweden. Vindeleven, Sweden. You can see the Aurora Borealis in the distance. So we are in northern Sweden. That's, we're pretty far north. So when I'm saying snowstorm, it's probably just normal weather for them. Alice in the back seat, the little girl, keeps asking, where's Dad? When's Dad coming? And then she finally asks, what happened to Dad? And we don't know. They get to the place they're going, to the cabin. And when they go inside, hanging on the wall, we are meant to see. We are specifically guided to see a painting. The painting is, in fact, called The Wounded Angel. And it's a painting by a Finnish painter called Hugo Simberg. It's a very famous painting in Finland. It's generally considered that the 2 boys carrying the wounded angel in the picture are, in fact, Hugo and his brother, who were both born in the same month of the same year. They have the same father, but 2 different mothers, carrying the wounded angel. The wounded angel has a very symbolic, the painting, the wounded angel, is considered by art aficionados to represent the suffering of the Finnish people, but that it may also represent the healing. So in this picture we have, that's well known to people, the duality of illness and healing. And I think that's going to matter in this show a lot. The duality, the 2 sides, the yin and yang. From an American point of view, it's a very obscure painting to reference like that, but this isn't necessarily an American show. So Alice asks her mother if she can have a story, and the mother says yes. Joe says yes. But Alice doesn't want Joe standing there to tell her a story. She turns on her tablet and watches a recording of Joe read a story from the International Space Station. So Joe takes a bag that has the glowy canister thing in it, and she goes out into the snow and hides or puts the bag with the canister in it in the tool shed or wood shed or whatever the little shed is outside the cabin. When she goes back into the cabin, Alice is sleeping. She turns and goes back outside because she thinks she hears something, and she thinks she hears Alice yelling for her. And that's when we finally get the end of the cold open and the credits roll and we start the episode. That's a ton of information before we even get to the opening credits of the show. So this would be a great time while the credits roll. Hit that like button if you're liking this video or my delivery. I'm going to cover this entire series, so maybe hit subscribe so you won't miss any episodes when they drop and hit the notification bell so you know when we do it. These first three are going to take me a little longer to get out, but I'm going to try to do every other episode within 24 hours of the show dropping. Fingers crossed. So I guess we're going to call that cold open the present, because then we come back to 5 weeks ago or 5 weeks before that. And we're in Germany with Magnus and Alice. Magnus is Alice's dad, Joe's husband. Joe is short for Johanna. And they're getting ready to go to work and school, but they're also getting ready to talk to Mom on the space station. They get into the phone call or the video call, and Alice is talking on the tablet, and Joe's on the space station talking on the tablet and saying hi to Yaz and Paul and the other astronauts as they're doing their things. And as they're talking, and Paul starts the experiment for NASA, the accident happened. Now, there's an interesting thing when we are talking on the space station before the accident. There's a zoom out away from the station, and then the accident happens, and we zoom back into the space station. I'm sure it has meaning that I'm missing, because it's very obvious that they did it and when they did it and the timing of it. And a lot of this show is about timing and perspective and what you're supposed to be looking at. I thought the accident was really well done, considering they weren't actually on the space station, with the weightless stuff being thrown around. And, Joanna had the tablet attached to her hand until it got knocked off. And I thought all that was pretty good. So after the accident, whatever hit them, Joe had to go on a spacewalk to go see what they could fix or what has to happen. And it's Joe and Ilya. Yeah, Joanna and Ilya go out on the spacewalk, and Joanna gets to the truss. Her camera starts to malfunction, so nobody can see what she sees. There's no cameras on the truss. She finds the opening of whatever hit the station, and then she opens up that section and pulls the orange fabric out that hit them, and it turns out that it is, in fact, a Soviet-era cosmonaut. We see the mummified body inside of a dead woman, and then the body drifts off into space. Just as Ilya comes around to help Joanna, as he comes around, there's no body. He only sees Joe. So there were no cameras. Joe's the only one that saw the body. So when she says over the comms that it was a body, that it was a Soviet-era cosmonaut, we see Henry's reaction, Henry Caldera, and we see the Russian woman's reaction. Her name is Irene Lysenko. I'll learn it as we go. Irina. And we see Henry take red and white pill. That's the first time we see those. So what has happened is they've lost life support, and they've lost part of the power to one of the escape modules. So Soyuz 1, which is Soyuz is the capsule that they'll use to return, is not functioning. Soyuz 2 is functional but only holds 3 people. I did forget to mention that in the chaos of the accident, the astronaut that was setting up the NASA experiment died. First, he got his arm impaled. They had to amputate the arm, and then he had cardiac arrest, and he didn't make it. It was a very good scene with them having to brace themselves across the hall to be able to give CPR to Paul, but Paul didn't make it. And Paul is the father of Alice's friend. So we see Alice's friend at school. It's her father. And when Alice got to school late and she joined the line, her friend, Paul's daughter, said that she had nightmares. So they decide that 3 of the 4 remaining astronauts would return to Earth in Soyuz 2, and 1 astronaut will have to stay behind and fix 1 and come home with the remains of Paul. Everybody tries to volunteer. Joe is in command and gives the order for everybody to go. So they go. And then what Joe has to do is she has to go to the command module and disconnect individual batteries and take them back to the Soyuz capsule and reattach them. The obstacle she has to overcome is that she is circling the Earth once every 90 minutes, and for 45 minutes she'll be in darkness. That's a problem because the only power she has in the main structure of the International Space Station is when they're in the light. The solar panels are making electricity to make light, but the batteries don't work, so they're not storing anything. So she starts the process. And then she has to go into the Soyuz capsule and wait for 45 minutes and then come back out. And she draws a picture of the cosmonaut that she saw and sends it down. And when Irene sees the picture that Joe drew, we see her take one of the yellow and red pills. So those are becoming significant. So Henry Caldera, who is the NASA official that we see talking to the station, wants to have Joe retrieve the Cal experiment, the cylinder that NASA was doing. And Irene says, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to recover the people. We're not going to recover the experiment. And he asked why, and she said because she's not sure that it didn't cause the accident, which was very interesting because there was a gap and so they gave the order for the experiment to start. The experiment starts, there's an alarm, and then they're hit. So the experiment did run for a moment for the alarm before they were hit, but not long. But they think that it gathered enough data, and Henry Caldera really wants it back. And Henry says to, is it Irene? It is Irene. Says to Irene, how's your sister? And Irene says, you know she's dead. How's your brother? And Henry says, I haven't seen him in quite some time. Thank God. Put a pin in that. We're coming right back to that in a couple of minutes. Stick around. So Joe realizes that it's taking her about 50 minutes to move one battery. And then she has a 90-minute protocol for launch. And she realizes she doesn't have enough time. So she has to change the way she's working. So as Joe's working and she's talking to ground control, I think she calls them Soup, T-S-U-P, Soup. They let her know that her family's coming. They're arriving in the building. And as soon as they get there and she's about to be able to talk to her family, they lose communications. Alice isn't dealing very well and she runs away, but Joe knows what she has to do. She does start to hallucinate and she's on the space station and she starts to hear knocking and she has a breath mask on and she turns on the space station and suddenly she's in the hallway in the cabin and she's walking towards a door that has the necklace that Alice made. Suddenly, Joe's back on the IIS and it's lighting up and she hears Alice scream again and she's back 5 weeks later in the snow with the lantern, hearing Alice, and she finds a cabin. Going into the cabin, it's similar to the cabin they were in originally. There's a frozen dead cat on the floor, and the picture on the wall is not the wounded angel, but now it is what appears to be a wounded demon. And there's a wardrobe with Alice's made necklace. And Joe opens the wardrobe and there's Alice wearing a hat like Joe has on. And she says, Mom, where have you been? And that's the end of the episode. So, wow, boy, oh boy, boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So it's interesting that Alice is named Alice, maybe because maybe she is through the looking glass. If you've paid attention, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the clips, all of them, but the cinematographer and the director are doing a good job of using reflections to remind us that we're dealing with multiple realities. We almost every time we see a reflection of Joe, we see multiple reflections of her. So we know The pills that we saw both Henry and Irene take, the red and yellow ones, those are lithium bicarbonate, and they're used to treat manic episodes in bipolar patients. Those are real pills. So they're treating these astronauts as if they have become bipolar. The conversation between Henry and Irene about Irene seeing her quote unquote sister, and Irene says, "You know she's dead." And if Henry has seen his brother, he said, "No, thank God." But Bud, I believe, is Henry's brother. I believe both of those astronauts are experiencing what Joe's experiencing. And the little yellow and red pills help them deal. Now, it's interesting that they have twins playing the role of Alice. So Joe's daughter, Alice, is being played by two different actresses. And I have not yet determined if one indicates one reality and one indicates the other. And the distinguishing feature might or might not be that one of them has a scar on her forehead. It seems like it doesn't seem like it matters. It seems like as I have separated the realities, it doesn't seem to fit, but maybe I've just done it wrong. Maybe there's something we need to know yet. But I think that's really interesting. That's going to let them do some fundamentally scary things with twin girls playing the same character, because you actually can put them in the same room. So I really do think, I don't know if it's the experiment that did it, because they didn't do the experiment before. And it seems like both Irene and Henry are experiencing the same thing. There's so much to talk about. It's a very complex story. Let me know your thoughts on this. Let me know in the comments what you think, how all this is going to happen. I am dividing my episodes into episodes. So I'm going to stop here and we'll pick it up for episode 2. I'm Sean. This is Sean's Take.